Hello, welcome back to Mrs. Torres' YouTube channel. Today we are going to talk about completing the square. This is a method that we use when we have a quadratic that we can't factor or we might be having a really hard time factoring. And today we're going to talk when our leading coefficient is 1, and then tomorrow we'll do when our leading coefficient is not 1. All right, let's learn this by looking at an example. X squared minus 6x minus 47 equals 0. We can't find any numbers that multiply to 47 and add to 6. So our first step, we're going to move the negative 47 to the other side. So by doing that, we're going to add 47 to both sides, right? So we'll be left with x squared minus 6x equals 47. And this is where the completing the square comes in. So our next step, we are going to take half of b and we're going to square that. Now remember, b is the number that's attached to our x. So we're going to take negative 6 and take half of that, or divide by 2, right? Taking half and dividing by 2 are the same thing. And we're going to square that. So that's negative 3 squared. We're just going to leave it as negative 3 squared right now. So we're going to add negative 3 squared to our left side, and we're going to add negative 3 squared to our right side. So we're going to be left with x squared minus 6x. Actually, let's just get 9. I changed my mind. We know negative 3 squared gives us 9. So we'll just add 9 to both sides. So 47 plus 9 gives us 56. Now, 9 is kind of our magic number here. It's our magic number because when we add 6 over here, it creates a perfect square trinomial. So we've created a perfect square trinomial. And what that means is when we factor it, it's going to be something like x plus a squared. So whatever our factor is, it's just going to be that factor twice. So let's go ahead and factor then. We need two numbers that add to negative 6, multiply to 9. So if you want, you can write out your factors of 9, 1, 9, 3, and 3. Well, if we make both these negative, we'll still get positive 9, and then we add them, we get negative 6. So it's x minus 3 times x minus 3. And we can't forget about our 56 on the right side there. Now, since our factors are the same, we can write it like this, right? So it's x minus 3 squared equals 56. Now, before we move on, up here, the reason why I originally was going to leave it as negative 3 squared like this is because notice when we factored it, that half of b was our factor, right? That's the number that we eventually factored there. So eventually we can leave this as negative 3 or whatever squared, because then factoring will be super easy. You'll know that's going to be our factor. All right, now that we've factored, we know how to solve this. We've done this a bunch of times. We've done it with real numbers. We've done it with imaginary numbers. So we just take the square root of both sides. X minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 56. Add 3 to both sides. We get x equals 3 plus or minus. And we can simplify the square root of 56. If you do that, you get 2 root 14. And that is our answer. So we use this method when we cannot factor or it's hard to factor, and it makes something that we can factor, and it makes it perfect square so we can solve by taking square roots. All right, let's look at another example here. So let's try x squared minus 9x plus 45 equals 0. So whenever we're giving something like this, we always want to try and factor, right? So two numbers that multiply to 45 and add to 9, I can't really think of any. So we're going to use completing the square. So our first step, we've got to move the constant. So x squared minus 9x equals negative 45. And then our next step is take half of b squared and add it to both sides. So negative 9 divided by 2 squared. Now, unlike our first example, 9 divided by 2 gives me a decimal, right? So I'm just going to leave that as an improper fraction. Just leave it as negative 9 over 2 squared. So we're going to add negative 9 over 2 squared to both sides. All right, so over here, I'm just going to rewrite my trinomial. X squared minus 9x plus negative 9 over 2 squared. I know it looks funny, but if we got a fraction here, it'd be really hard to factor. But if we leave it like this, we know negative 9 over 2 is going to be our factor there. So then equals, and then over here, we do just want to actually add these two numbers. So we'll take negative 45 plus, now you guys have fractions on your calculator, but this is my personal calculator and I can't do fractions, so I'm just going to divide. So negative 9 divided by 2 squared. And remember, we don't want decimals, so we're going to turn that into a fraction. So math frac, and we get negative 99 over 4. All right, now I know this kind of looks messy, but because we've created a perfect square trinomial, we know that our left side will factor into x minus 9 halves squared, right? And then it still equals negative 99 over 4. And now we just solve. So we take the square root of both sides. X minus 9 halves equals, let's simplify this a little bit before we rewrite it. So since I have a negative, I'm going to pull out the I. So I root 99 over the square root of 4 gives me 2. So I just simplified this and rewrote it this way, pulled out the I, and the square root of 4 gives me 2. And then we just got to get x by itself. Oh, I forgot my plus or minus. Can't forget that. Need my 2 answers. So we add 9 halves to both sides. So we get x equals 9 halves plus or minus I root 99 over 2. Now we could leave it like that, but because we have a common denominator here, we could just add our numerators. So we could write it as 9 plus or minus I root 99 over 2. And then our last step would just be simplify the square root of 99. So if we did that, we get 3 root 11. So our final answer would be 9 plus or minus 3I root 11 over 2. And that is our final answer. All right, so the last thing that I want to do here, those are the last examples. I just want to kind of put some steps together so you can look back on it when you're practicing. So This is when you cannot factor a quadratic. The first step, we are going to move the constant to one side of our equation, and sometimes you might have to move the other terms. So the x squared and our bx term to the other side. So you always want your equation to look like x squared plus bx equals c. So your constant on one side, your x and your x squared term on the other. Second step, you are going to add your b term divided by 2 squared to both sides. Remember, just like any equation, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. Then you're going to factor your trinomial because you've created a perfect square trinomial. When you factor it, it's going to be x plus b over 2 and x plus b over 2, which you will always be able to rewrite x plus b over 2 squared. This is because it's a perfect square trinomial. Once you have that, you can solve using square roots. And then lastly, just always remember to simplify. Simplify your square roots. If you have square roots in the denominator, make sure you rationalize them. If you have negative under the square root, make sure you pull out that I, all that good stuff. All right, see you in the next video.